This is why you should be careful who you talk to online. When I was 15 and getting into my junior year, I created a Twitter account. I didn't tell anyone my username, including my family or friends. I also didn't upload any pictures or specify my exact location, and I put a different city than where I lived. I had around 30 followers and I didn't follow many people. One evening in October, someone sent me a weird direct message. They had 200 followers and the message read, "Hi, I'm Robin. I just turned 17. I wanted to know if you lived in the city because I'm moving there and I'm going to that high school soon. I'd like to make some new friends." I immediately thought something was wrong because nowhere in my profile did I list my actual town, but I remembered a tweet I made a few weeks ago about buses in which I mentioned my city. I was bored and he was polite, so we started talking. The discussion was mainly about high school teachers and cafeteria food. As it got later in the night, he started asking more personal questions like if I lived far from the school or if I was ever home alone. I never answered these questions because it was too shady for me. The next day we talked again and started bonding. We had a 2-week vacation in October, and at the end of it is when he finally told me that he would be attending my high school. I was so excited to finally meet him. Part 2 of why you should be careful who you talk to online. He asked to pick a place to meet during the morning break on our first day back to school after break. I was so happy to meet him and told him to join me in the hall. However, when he realized people would be around, he said he'd rather meet me in an isolated place because he might not recognize me in a crowd. It was a good enough excuse for me, and I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, it seemed a little creepy, but since we were in school, I was confident that nothing bad could happen. I dressed up and made myself really pretty and counted down the minutes till we met. When he arrived, it was him. He wasn't a catfish, but he looked a little older than 17. We talked and got along so well, and at the end of it, he asked me to go to lunch with him. I refused because I didn't have money and wouldn't let anyone pay for me. He seemed disappointed but offered to walk me home after class. I told him I have to take the bus, but he could walk me there. This became a routine for another 2 months. One day, I complained about how lonely I'd be at home as everyone in my family was going to be out that day. I know it was reckless, but I thought I could trust him by this point. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. I waved goodbye and put my headphones in. Little did I know that my life was in danger. Part 3 of why you should be careful who you talk to online. When I got off, I had a weird gut feeling that someone was watching me. Since it was December, it was already dark by the time that I had gotten off the bus. I paused my music but kept my earphones in not to draw suspicion. It was silent, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew someone was following me. As quietly as possible, I reached for my keys in my pocket. As soon as I pulled them out, I ran. It was the best and fastest sprint of my life. I somehow managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I deactivated the alarm and looked through the glass panel on the door. It wasn't a peephole but a whole window, so if someone wanted to see inside the house, they could. Standing there looking at me with the creepiest face was Rob. He followed me home, probably with a car, and I was paralyzed. We stared at each other for a minute before I ran to the kitchen to grab a knife. When I got back to the door, he was still there and started banging. I feared the glass would break, but it didn't. After 5 minutes, he stopped and went around the house banging on every shutter until he came back to the door. He looked angry, but my neighbor's car pulled in and he ran off, probably thinking it was my family. After this, he harassed me online, which finally made me delete my Twitter. No one even knew or heard of him, which is probably why he looked older. I never heard of him again, but I still wonder what could have happened that night.
This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 1. When I was about 12 years old, I lived in Kansas. Both my parents were out and I was home alone with my 2 dogs. I was sitting in my bedroom playing on my computer when I heard the very distinct sound of the front door open and close, like someone had just come in. My dogs got up and ran into the living room, and so I just assumed my parents were home. I shouted for my mum to confirm this and heard no response. I paused my game and walked out into the living room to see, and as I did, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had heard someone come in, clear as day, but no one was there. I wasn't wearing headphones and I'd had the computer volume turned down, so I knew it couldn't have been the game. I tried calling my parents, but neither of them picked up, so for the first time in my life, I called the police. This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 2. I explained the situation to the 911 operator, and she told me that police were on their way. I stood there rooted to the spot, and not long after my parents got home. The police arrived shortly after, and told us that thieves usually wait until homeowners leave, check the door, and if it's unlocked they go in and take valuables. They checked the house, but found no one. They said whoever it was probably left when they heard that someone was home. They told us to make sure that we lock the doors, but not to worry too much. Not long after it happened, I told the story to one of my friends, and he said, "You only heard the door once. That means they were most likely already in the house. You just heard them leave."
Here's a story time of how me and my sisters almost got kidnapped. So my mom and her boyfriend were just gonna go out and have a night to themselves, and I was home watching my 2 little sisters. At the time, I was 13, my 2 little sisters were 9 and 6. So around 6 p.m., my mom and her boyfriend leave. Me and my sisters just sit down and watch a movie, and then I get up to make them dinner. I get paranoid really easily, and while I was making them dinner, I look out the kitchen window, and I thought I seen somebody in the backyard. I text my mom and she gets on the cameras that are outside and she said nobody was out there. I continue making them dinner, we sit down and eat, and then we start watching another movie. Then we start hearing knocking. It wasn't coming from any of the doors, it was coming from the side of the house. I didn't want to bother my mom on her one night out, so I just took the kids and we went upstairs and watched a movie in my room. My 6-year-old sister at the time went to the bathroom and she came back in literal tears. She was literally crying so hard until I finally got her to stop and tell me what was wrong. She said as she was walking back from the bathroom, she seen somebody downstairs. I quietly locked my door and I put my sisters in the closet and I called my mom right away. I'm running out of time, like for part 2 of how me and my sisters almost got kidnapped. I called my mom and then she looked on the cameras downstairs and somebody was in the house. She never told me what the person was doing. I guess she just didn't want me worrying, but she called 911 right away. While my 2 little sisters were in the closet, my 6-year-old sister would not stop crying and I'm pretty sure the person downstairs heard her. At this time, my mom and her boyfriend were already on the way and so were the police. I heard him coming up the steps, so I quietly opened the closet door and promised my sisters that they would stay quiet and be calm no matter what. I didn't know what he was here for, so I hid in the side of the bed in front of the closet so that he would get to me before he got to the girls. I heard him just rummaging through stuff and stuff breaking. Then a couple minutes later, I hear the police sirens. Right as I hear the police sirens, I hear a bedroom window smash. While trying to stay as calm as I can, 3 policemen bust down the door. They grab me and my sisters and take us outside. About 5 minutes after they take us outside and put us in the back of their car, my mom and her boyfriend shows up. About 20 minutes later after he was caught, they did notify us that he was wanted for murder of 2 younger girls and 1 adult male. About $10,000 of our stuff was either missing or broke. Then about a month later, when we were capable to, we did move.
This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open. She's like, I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either. Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house. And so he jokingly asks her, you ever see any ghosts walking around your attic? Her face got completely serious, and she's like, you know, as soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening. So we investigated and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years. This is what they meant when they said, don't talk to strangers. In the early 1900s, a 10-year-old boy was playing in the woods when a tall man appeared and asked if he wanted to come back to his cabin for dinner. Totally caught off guard, the boy reluctantly agrees and begins walking. When they get to the cabin, the boy is relieved when he sees Paul, a family friend, sitting on the porch, so the boy happily goes inside. After they eat, the boy says thank you to the strange tall man, says bye to Paul, and then he leaves. He had only walked a few steps when he sees his family, along with Paul, running up the path towards him, frantically asking if he was okay. Confused, the boy says, I'm just fine, and he looks at Paul and he's like, why didn't you tell them I was with you at the cabin? And he points over his shoulder. Paul glances over the boy's shoulder and then narrows his eyes and says, you were kidnapped by a cult 3 days ago. No one's seen you. Terrified, the boy turns around to look at the cabin he just came from, and it's gone. All he sees is a dark forest that stretches for miles.
When you go to sleep tonight, don't do what she did. Once there was a young woman named Alicia who moved into a very old house with her parents, but she could have never expected the horrifying things that this would lead to. After living in this house for a few weeks, things started becoming strange. Alicia noticed she was becoming weaker and feeling sick. Pretty soon, she couldn't leave her bed and would sleep for most of the day. The doctors came to examine her, and everyone wanted to find out what this mysterious sickness was, but no one had any answers, until one day Alicia passed away while sleeping. Then, after her funeral, her mother came home and with a broken heart began cleaning her room. That's when she noticed something strange about Alicia's pillow. There were 2 small red stains. She picked it up and realized the pillow was unusually heavy, so she called her husband to go look at it with her. Then Alicia's mother felt something inside the pillow move. Her father opened the pillow and took all the feathers out. There they saw something crawl out. It was a monstrous black spider. Night after night, as Alicia lay in bed, this huge spider had been slowly drinking all her blood through her pillow.